Hello everyone, welcome to the video lecture series on media skills. This series is produced under the grants provided by Department of Information and Public Relations, Government of Karnataka in association with Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Karnataka State Akka Women's University, Vijayapura. Today we have with us Dr. Rakesh Katarey. He will be delivering a lecture on the topic Basics of TV Journalism. During his last 25 years of professional and academic experience, Professor Rakesh Katarey has set up some of the best known mass communication institutes, an award-winning documentary filmmaker at prestigious national and international festivals. He has also guided students into winning national acclaims and awards. He has also lectured postgraduates at the Birmingham Institutes of Arts and Design, United Kingdom, and was a special invitee to speak on social consequences on new media technologies at Royal Television Society, United Kingdom. Besides publications in refereed international journals like Media Asia, Mr. Katarey has written full-length analyses on media, terrorism and conflict in national newspapers like The Hindu. He is an expert on news studies, broadcast media, film and rhetorical analysis. Now, I welcome Dr. Rakesh Katarey to deliver his lecture. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to a series of videos on television news. In this series, we are going to talk about how do you really cover stories, what is news, how do you source news, how do you put together a television news story, and when you work in teams, how you can actually put together an entire news program. This is primarily for students, okay? Students who are trying to look at the possibility of staying in the university and covering news stories and putting those news stories into a bulletin. And in any case, all the students have textbooks, so I will not be repeating everything that is there in the textbook, but certainly some basics will come into play, and I'll try to give you additional things that are normally not mentioned in your television journalism books. Okay, my name is Rakesh Katarey. I have been teaching, I've been a professor of television for nearly 20 years. I've been teaching television skills. I've also taught documentary filmmaking and postmodernism at the University of Central England on a British Council sponsorship. So many of my students, of course, they are in the industry. They are editors of very well-known magazines today. They are television producers, they've worked in news, they have designed shows, and they've done a lot of television and film work also. So I hope that sort of qualifies me to do this particular series. Now in this episode I'm going to talk to you about something very basic, and that basic is what is news to begin with. So news has got many definitions, okay, but there is something by its very, by the meaning of its word, new as in news, which means whatever is new that is taking place out there, you try to cover that, and that is what we call news. Okay, there's nothing that is old that gets covered in your newspaper or radio or television. Okay, and anything that is broadcast has to be something new. Okay, now remember, there are many definitions of news, as I said. The first and very famous definition of news is the first rough draft of history. Now, why is it a first rough draft of history? There are lots of things that are happening around you, and you pick up the most important things to actually cover. And once you cover that, okay, you have very little time to break the story to the audience or to the people, the reading publics or the listening or the viewing publics. So when the process of observing and the process of disseminating that information is very, very short, it tends to be only a rough draft of what is really happening. It cannot be a perfect draft of history. Okay, so every day as things happen, we bring those things quickly and quickly cover them and quickly write them, quickly produce them and quickly give it to the audiences. Okay, so news is the first rough draft of history. News is immediate. the important, and the things that have impact on our lives. Okay, so this is very important. Things that don't have any impact on our life. A lot of things are happening in the world all the time. You cannot cover everything, is not news. Something that has to have impact on our lives, which brings us to what are the things that have impact on our lives. Okay, and what are the news values, and what makes a news item or a piece of information newsworthy or worthy of coverage in the bulletin. Okay, now let's understand something. All the reporters in the world working all the hours of the day could not witness all the happenings of the world. Okay, this is a very famous saying by Walter Lippmann in his seminal essay on public opinion, his work, Public Opinion. So let me repeat. All the reporters of the world, if all the reporters of the world were to get together and they were to work all the hours of the day, that is 24 hours of the day also, still it would be impossible to witness or to observe or to know all the happenings of the world in a day. Which means that only the selected areas of the world, selected happenings of the world, at selected hours of the world, make it into your newspaper, radio or television. Okay, so how do we really pick what is important, what needs to be told and what need not be told to the people? Okay, now we have to understand that news media do not keep an eye on the entire mankind. Okay, you have so many acres and kilometers, square kilometers of land, and so many people in this world that you cannot really be hopeful of covering all the things that are happening in their lives. So we need to have some kind of a mechanism to cover the news. Now, I said, when we select a particular piece of information and we call it newsworthy, worthy enough to deliver as news to in the newspaper or a radio or a television channel, then it needs to pass through some tests. These tests are not some industrial tests on some assembly line, no, but these are called news values, which are internalized. That these values tell us instantly that yes, this is newsworthy. And the most important of all news values for television is what we call timeliness, which means that news is a highly perishable commodity. News can, within 2 hours, for example, after delivery of the newspaper, they say newspaper goes into the dustbin. Television news is given by the hour. What you say now can get outdated the very next hour. So news has to be something that is happening in television, especially. Immediacy is very, very important. How quickly can you really go and give the news to the audience is very important. Because newspapers can afford to wait because there is only one newspaper, a day. It is a daily newspaper. But television news comes every hour because you have now a number of nearly 50 channels of 24/7 news coming in all the time, bombarding people with news. And everybody is out there trying to get the news. Okay. Now, one good example of that, of timeliness, is that, match evenly poised, let's say at Eden Gardens. Okay. The match is evenly poised at the end of the day, of a day's play in a test match, and you have to give that news. Let's say the match is evenly poised in the afternoon. Within 1 hour, the match can change. Suddenly one side can get an upper hand or go down. Okay. So the uncertainties are very important, and television is always present every hour to capture the uncertainties and give it very quickly. If at the end of the day's play, if the newspaper comes out and the newspaper announces to you in the morning that the match is evenly poised, anybody can win. And in the very first hour next day, or very first half hour of the day's play next day, television is the one which will inform you that the match has now swung the other way, or one way or the other. Okay, so timeliness is very, very important, and the most important news value in television. Okay, the evergreen value, I would say, of any news, of course, is proximity. What is proximity? How close? Okay, now let's say we are sitting in India and there is a news report which says, or a meteorological report that says, floods are likely in Costa Rica, evacuation is completed. Okay, you are sitting in Bangalore. How is Costa Rica important to you? It is important news, but is it relevant to the viewer? Is it relevant to the Bangalore viewer? Is the Bangalore viewer culturally bound with people in Costa Rica? Do they have people living in Costa Rica? May not be so. And therefore, even if the floods are likely in Costa Rica, even if the evacuation is complete, it may not be covered in your television news bulletin. So that is what we say, the power of proximity. Unless something is close to where you live, culturally, geographically, okay, or if you have tie-ups, very strong ties with that country, that may not be relevant. Then something that is, the news has to be something exceptional, which means 6 succumb to, monkey attacks in Trinidad. Okay, 6 succumb to monkey attacks in Trinidad. It's exceptional. Okay, it may be short on proximity. It's not happening close. It's not happening in Bangalore. But it is interesting, nevertheless, to know that 6 people actually died, and monkeys could attack humans so brutally. Okay, so the exception to the rule is always going to be news. Okay, so exceptional, anything exceptional that happens is always going to be to make any information newsworthy. And that is why Charles Dana once said that when a dog bites a man, it is not news, but when a man bites a dog, that is news. Okay, so something unusual. Now, news is also something that needs to have an impact, which means impact that likely to have impact in the future. Which means, let's say there is an attack on on US consulate in India. Okay, now this may determine the turn of events in the near future. Okay, or let's say there is an attack on US consulate in any of the West Asian countries, okay, in the Gulf region. Now this may determine the future course of events. So although it is not something that is happening close by, although it may not be of immediate, it may not have immediate impact on our lives, it is still very important, because in the future it will have an impact on our lives, because whatever happens in West Asia is likely to affect India also. So fuel supplies may be cut, fuel prices may go up, it may determine the fate of our Indian economy, which is dependent on oil or dependent on West Asia for oil. Oil prices might shoot up, and therefore it might have great impact on our economy. So it may have, so anything that is impactful, that is bound to have impact in the future on us, will definitely be newsworthy. Then you have prominence, which means a film star escapes car accident. Okay, a film star escapes car accident. I mean, he comes out unhurt. Okay, now persons who are associated with films, with royalty, politics, show business, they all may get entangled in events that may otherwise never make it to the news. If they were not to be prominent people, nobody would probably, nobody is going to say, okay, so and so XYZ, escaped unhurt. But if Salman Khan were to escape unhurt, it makes news. So prominence of a person always is going to make it newsworthy. Okay. The next one, conflict. Conflict is always going to generate news. Why? Let's say US invades Iraq, or let's say lathi charge on anti-liquor rallies. Okay. Now, ideological, political, armed conflict of any nature is always going to generate news. So you have strikes, uprisings, war, demonstrations, protests. All these end up being in your newspapers, on television channels, because a larger audience may be interested in watching conflict, because conflict is full of drama. Okay, and it is the lifeblood of any visual medium. Okay, it's like watching action TV live. Okay, so or action film live. Okay, now the other thing that that determines an information from getting into a publication or a news program is definitely the number of people who are involved or are affected. Recently we had the Kumbh Mela, for example. Lakhs are thronging Kumbh Mela. Okay, so the numbers themselves make it very, very important for that news to be covered. Okay, the sheer number of people who are converging in Haridwar makes it extremely newsworthy. On the other hand, we also have, let's say, some things that also affect us. Okay, which means hike in diesel prices. Now, the more the numbers who are going to be affected by a particular news, on the one hand, you said lakhs are thronging Kumbh Mela news, numbers are. Hike in fuel prices or diesel prices also is going to affect lakhs of people. Almost everyone who has a vehicle, even those people who do not have vehicles, because diesel hike can also have an impact on inflation when it comes to food prices, and all the prices, transportation will go up, and therefore it will have a huge impact. Okay, so the number of people who are going to be impacted also determines how newsworthy an event or a happening may be. Now, it should also have consequence. Now, for example, I still remember, Y2K. So let's say computer virus brings online stock markets to a halt. Let's say, okay. Now, it is going to have very dire consequences. Any news, it's not just a computer virus, but it is a computer virus that has affected the stock markets. So how many people are involved in stock markets? How much of online and financial activity is going to be affected? So there is a consequence of something. Let's say theft in insurance office. Important documents are missing. That will again there is a consequence involved. Events may make news because of their likely consequence on other activities or events. Got it? So that is another. Human interest also makes information very, very newsworthy. Let's say city girl bags gold at Special Olympics, or let's say brothers chance reunion after 20 years. Okay, now city girl, an ordinary girl, bags gold at a Special Olympics. An extraordinary thing happening in the lives of ordinary people means that it is human interest story. Okay, extraordinary things that may happen in the lives of ordinary people. So that is your human interest story. That is also extremely newsworthy. Then any news, becomes newsworthy which involves a lot of emotion, pathos. Okay, which means, let's say, little girl's 2-year battle with cancer comes to an end. People line up to catch a final glimpse of the great star Sushant Singh Rajput. Now, all these are going to create emotions. So they generate emotions of sorrow, compassion, sympathy, and therefore any new information that is going to bound to generate pathos or emotion is going to be extremely important and newsworthy. Then events and happenings that create a shock. Let's say politician caught on tape while accepting bribe. Let's say a politician of a well-known political party is caught on tape, on video, accepting bribes. Is very shocking, because we place a lot of trust in our politicians to run the country. And if one of them is going to be caught with hands in the till, it's going to shock. And therefore shock is a major news value. Now, let's say there is another news item. These are all hypothetical, mind you. Well-known Swamiji kills devotee, escapes with gold. Okay, Swamiji, in whom again you trust. When there is a betrayal of trust, that creates a shock, and therefore that event that catches the viewer's eye owing to the shock value, unexpected events. So that is also going to generate a lot of interest. Then there are also, if you really see, this is not really, it's unfortunate, but things that titillate also get into newspapers. Sometimes they get into radio not so much, but definitely television also. If not in India, elsewhere in the world, there is always a lot of titillation also makes a lot of news. So there is a graphic description, photographs featuring sex, usually found in tabloid press, So that is beginning to gain currency in mainstream media also. You have a lot of, especially women are objectified, and those kind of pictures are played. So events that primarily have to do with sex and intended to titillate rather than inform audiences, unfortunately also have become newsworthy. They shouldn't be, they are not, because they have no consequence, I would say, on people's lives. But unfortunately that is so. Now in the next section, because we are accustomed to newspapers all the time, and television is fairly, of course, there is now a generation of people which has grown only on television, so one cannot say that. But at the same time, as journalists, television journalists, you need to know what is the difference between news television and newspapers. Okay, how does the audience in a television news channel experience information, experience news flow, and how does it respond and reflect and receive a newspaper news are a little different. Okay, and one has to understand before you get into the profession, and that is why I'm trying to find out what are the distinctive features of television as opposed to newspapers. Now television is always, as I said, news on the hour. Accent is on speed. You need to quickly give the information, which means that many people say, oh, newspapers have a lot of information, television does not have newspaper. Television has more information. There's no doubt about it, because if you were to compare throughout the day, or a talk show or a chat show, you've got so many experts on it and issues are discussed. It's not as if they're not. But the newspaper simply has at one go a lot of stories. Okay, so if the television is going to have, let's say, 10 stories in one bulletin, newspaper is going to have 10 stories on every page. Okay, so there is bound to be, if there are 20 pages, you're really talking about a lot of stories at one go that are being served. Okay, but the newspaper comes out once in a day, and therefore the journalism that they actually promise concentrates on analysis. Television has got no time for analysis. Don't sit and try and analyze things on television. Analysis, you have separate programs, you have got chat shows, you have got panel discussions and what have you. But television news does not have time to actually analyze, which means that television in that sense can give you a dumbed down version of what is really happening. Mainly because television is breaking the story very quickly. Newspaper, you have got all the time of the world. You keep, collating facts as they occur. So you have 1 day's time to actually come back and file the story. That kind of luxury television does not have. Okay. So if a television, bulletin has got, let's say 12 stories, we said 10 or 12 stories, the newspaper will have, 10 to 12 stories on each page. Okay. Now, the challenge in television is to stay with the story and update. Because now, once you go to a particular place and some disaster is taking place, once you reach there, you continuously cover the story every hour. And every hour you are providing the update. So the deadline pressure is very, very great. You need to tell the viewer when he is switching on the television knows that only television can give me what newspaper cannot give me. They are expecting you to update them. And this also puts a lot of pressure on journalists. Okay. And many a time journalists, television journalists, give sensational news. They don't get the numbers right. They don't get the facts right. Because there's so much of pressure on them to, give, some information, because the viewers are tuning in and they have to give the information. So there's greater deadline pressure. Newspapers, of course, can, as I say, have the opportunity to wait for an entire day and then give the information. Television also is very different. Television news also is bound to be very different because television, please remember, many people say television now is completely, there's so much of drama on television, so many people are screaming at each other. Is that television news? That is not news at all to begin with. And therefore one has to distinguish between a good channel and a not so good channel. Okay. Now, if you watch, BBC, for example, which is, whether we like it or not, is probably one of the best television channels in the world. Similarly, you have PBS and in America, which has had a long history of good news stories and doing very good television news stories. There are many channels in the world that do amazing programs. Okay. Now, if you see in some of the tendency in Indian channels, it is also to do with a certain attitude that is coming in and also the competition that is there. Now, one is that, there are too many channels. Okay. Now, when you have too many channels coming in, there is tendency to cut costs. There is tendency not to investigate. There is also a tendency to cover what is, within an immediate territory. Okay, so you are not going beyond your territory and, covering news because you need to constantly feed the people with stories. So you don't go too far to do depth stories and things like that. And television in India is trying to, in many ways, I would say, compete with entertainment channels. Because with the flip of the button, people are watching a, star serial. And there is a lot of drama in the star serial. So television channels which do not do good homework, do not do any reporting, do not have many reporters on the field, and reporters who are not very qualified, they tend to, what they do is, such channels tend to compete with entertainment. So you are watching, live, fracas on television every night, prime time, whenever in the name of debate people are screaming at each other. It's like, watching people at the municipal tap fighting over water. At least there, you have a basic necessity people are fighting over. But here, what is it that they are really fighting over? It should make us think, but where is it actually coming from? I reckon that, something of this kind of news is happening mainly because television news channels are trying to compete with television entertainment channels. And as you have entertainment in other, channels, you are trying to provide your own kind of sensational entertainment in the name of prime time, discussions and what have you. And even in terms of, newspapers, you get one newspaper. Generally, you don't get more than 2 newspapers at home, generally. One newspaper itself is, I think, very few households are getting. So if you compare, newspaper has got nothing to compete with. Once it comes into your home, it is not competing with any other newspaper. You don't compare one newspaper with the other. But on television, you have got nearly 30 to 50 channels. All of them news only, I'm saying. So you keep flipping the channels in search of something that is interesting. When the viewer has got so many channels that they are flipping, and the moment, a little bit of boredom sets in, the viewer is changing. So it also depends on audience taste. If the audience tastes are molded into expecting entertainment from television channels, over a period of time, the channels and the news channels themselves will lose out, because there will be no credibility in the channels. So a television news channel is in a continuous state of competition with other channels which are playing simultaneously. Plus, the viewer has got a remote on hand. Newspapers do not have that kind of a problem at all. Okay. Now, television, the channel chooses the story the viewer will watch at any given point of time. So I have only 10 to 12 stories to actually give in a bulletin. So I choose which stories I need to really give to the viewer to watch at any given point of time. In a newspaper, the stories are printed, but you can go back and forth. You can go to the sports page first, and then come to the front page, and then go to the page 3, and then go to national page and what have you, or a business page. So you decide which page are you going to read, which story you are going to read. But television news can only give news one at a time. So you cannot choose, you cannot pull and watch. It is a push technology, which means that whatever is given to you, it needs to be consumed. Now all of this that I am saying will have a great impact on the way you are going to understand news and news bulletins later on. Okay, so therefore selection in television news is at a premium. What you select has to hit the bullseye, because you have got very few stories and you should get the viewers away from other channels. You need to hold on to the audience, and you need to ensure an audience flow also from one news item to another news item, one story to another news story. You need to make the audience wait in front of the channel and come back after a break. Very, very difficult in this kind of a competitive news scenario. So the manner in which newspapers and television are consumed are two different, so they are not really comparable. Okay, and therefore when people say that there is newspaper is a superior medium, it's not about superiority. It's just the ecology of each medium is a little different. Okay, now the other thing is, of course, television is not portable. Okay, now of course you can carry your mobile wherever newspaper used to go. So a reader could carry the newspaper and read it anywhere. Television, it's not possible, so that also makes a difference. Now television tells a story through combination of pictures and sounds. Now newspaper tell the story that is dominated by text. How is it different then? Because due to education and literacy, our human brains are getting accustomed to expressing themselves only through words, and therefore the words as text. Okay, but television is a visual medium. It's more tribal in nature, where you experience visuals, and the visual should be able to tell their own story, which means it's a new way of discovering the tribalism within us, which means the first paintings and first communication was visual. People used to draw in the caves, and those are the oldest pieces of any art, or you can say writing. Pictures, hieroglyphs for example, pictured writings, carved clay tablets of Mesopotamia. So all these are the language used to be more visual. So even when the alphabets were written, the alphabets resembled the pictures. Now after some time, there was the connection between the written alphabets and text and the visuals representation. There was a gap between the two because with the coming of language and written language in particular, printing and what have you. So language has to be mastered in a new way, but television is taking you back to visuals. People have to learn to communicate with visuals primarily. It is an audio visual medium where visual is the dominant force and it is not the text. Okay, so in that sense also television and newspaper, it needs, television needs a new way of thinking and expressing. Any person who's taking up television news has to be able to convey information through pictures, and what the pictures do not convey, you add that information through words. Okay, now journalist has to carry the camera everywhere when it comes to television. Newspapers have to carry only a pencil, and the moment people look at camera, they get very conscious. You give them a microphone, you show a microphone to it, it's like holding a gun to the temple. So television journalists always are going to have it tougher. One, you will not be able to get the best emotion out of a person when you switch on the camera and the mic. But when a person is talking to another person, he can forget that this man is a journalist, and he can easily sit and write and put it across in newspapers. But television journalist has to. Now other thing is that whatever television wants to say, it has to have visual evidence. Okay, so people need credibility is coming through pictures. Okay, so credibility comes by how many pictures you actually gather. So sometimes pictures themselves will end up making the news itself, conveying the news. Newspapers, written words carry a lot of credibility from the very beginning, because our ancient texts are also in that sense not visual but written, and even when they are in oral histories, they were actually narrated as as sounds. So it's always now, if we really go back and look at what actually gives credibility, because all our holy texts are also in text. Anything written is got an automatic credibility. Television therefore has to give pictures, because seeing is believing. That is also another value that we have. Of course, it's not always believing, we know that, but there is a natural advantage. When you show a picture, people tend to believe. So credibility comes from there. And the final one, there is pressure on television journalists to be technologically competent. You have to know how to do lighting, how to record sound, how to record pictures is something that you need to know. How to upload pictures, how do you edit pictures. Now this technical knowledge is very, very essential. Where technical knowledge in terms of writing starts with your inverted pyramid and things like that in newspapers, in television all that is necessary. Writing style is also important, but the writing style is very different from what it is in newspapers, and therefore the writing is writing to visuals and writing to sounds. So one is you cannot say I just know English, I know Kannada, and therefore I can go and cover the news. That is enough for newspapers. In television, visuals have to do the talking. Good visuals can transcend language also and be able to convey. So these things I think are very, very important for you. And so far, this is all I have in this particular episode. Until we meet next time. Thank you very much.